want to start by asking you about your TED Talk, which I thought was really terrific. And in that,
Thank you.
You begin by discussing how do you prepare a child to attend a classical music concert for the first time. And I'm wondering, how do you prepare an audience today for a concert that features exclusively contemporary classical music that they probably have never heard?
I would say that the last part of your sentence is the key one, because somehow when you prepare someone to come to something new from, when you invite someone, it's because you really want that people to be, how to say, like amazed, surprised, and enjoy. And somehow the one who delivers the invitation is the one that it's already there, right? At that point, like really enthusiastic about it. So my first kind of like clue or advice, it's always try to infuse your enthusiasm into your people, because if something moves you, that's why you want to share it with them. On the other hand, when we talk about like music in general, I think it's pretty, how to say, like useful to remember that what we do, it's a performing art. So everything exists when it's performed, even kind of like, San Matthias Passion from Bach, or, Sariaho piece that we will hear at the fore. And that angle, I think it helps a lot, because somehow it's a reminder that every piece was, first of all, a new piece at some point in history, but at the same time, it's music that exists there. And to experience that, it's such a great joy, because it's what we do is not kind of like a visit to a museum. I think it's completely different. We are not going to contemplate like hanging pictures. It's actually, we are going there to experience the sounds that come alive. Now, in particular with contemporary music, I've never been afraid of that invitation, because somehow I feel that new music, it's actually more linked to us that maybe, a Mozart symphony, to whom never went to a concert hall before, because music, art in general, somehow evolves with us in the way we experience the world, in the way we experience the sounds, the rhythms, the how artists are so inspired by their surroundings, that somehow it's kind of like a perpetual reflection of our structure. So my invitation wouldn't be ever from the kind of like the afraid point of view, but actually to embrace the sound world. And as like maybe some hints of it, it's like probably to enjoy the experience with an open heart, with an open mind, with an open ears, be drawn by the rhythms, the colors, maybe even like a tune that you can whistle after. But you should create expectations by not having all the answers before. And that's a great way to go. It's kind of like, okay, surprise me.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up a tune that you can whistle on the way out, because I remember having a conversation in 2008 with one of the elder statesmen in the bass section of the LA Philharmonic. And he told me that he told Esa-Pekka Salonen, I love what you write, but don't be afraid of melody. And I'm wondering, what do you think the role is of melody in new work today? And is it even important to have melody?
Well, I think melody, it is important, of course, because somehow it's linked to one of our basic motions of music, which is rhythm and melody, because from the moment we acknowledge our heartbeat, we acknowledge rhythm. And when we acknowledge that we can sing and kind of like project like sounds that are connecting to other sounds, somehow we are aware that we are able to sing melodies, right? And then we linked with like all the acoustic nature and harmony theories about like somehow music was always there. But at the same time, the lack of melody, it's not that I never felt it like a table without a leg, because somehow we tend to think that way, kind of like if a tune is not wissable or if we cannot remember it, then it's something missing. And perhaps because, yes, melody, of course, is one of the most primal things to relate with music. That's for sure. But at the same time, when you don't have like a wissable tune, you do go into another amount of layers of music that are, I think, as important and as enjoyable as the tune itself, like which is texture, which is rhythm, which is surprises, expectations when the meter change, colors. I mean, that there's so much a sound world when composers starts to work with the colors, and you actually can enjoy that like blend of textures and different sounds, and you are wondering, wow, what is this sound? And in the overall shape, and that it's, I would say it, for me at least, it's the most important aspect of music or anything that tells a story, is kind of like the structure, because music goes somewhere. A painting goes somewhere, a novel, everything has like an inner storytelling. So not because we don't have a melody, there is no an evolving story that capture our attention, and we can actually find our mind dealing with when is the climax, when is the end, what is that silence that's struck me so kind of like unexpectedly. So I don't know, I would say we shouldn't be afraid of a lack of melody, because that help us to enjoy other things.
Well, you mentioned again the element of surprise. What surprises you most about contemporary music?
Well, I think surprise, it's a primal motion element, kind of like a tool of any artist. I think to provoke, it's such an essential aspect of art in general. I would say every great piece of art, it has this kind of like not give for granted anything, because when you give it for granted, suddenly there's something there that is kind of like, oh, caught your attention. Obviously, in the contemporary music, the I would say the most kind of like obvious aspect of the surprise is that we cannot expect something that we still don't know. When you attend to a premiere, everything is so new that it's kind of like, how can I be safe? How can I kind of like, be rooted to something that I know it's going to happen? When you make this prediction, it's like safe place, like, okay, finally, tonic after a dominant, like a 5-1 or a metric pattern that you finally kind of like, okay, this is earth. But when we go back and we see that every single composer did this, from Bach and the dissonances, or where he ended, in a major triad after like a minor development, or Beethoven, which is but before Beethoven, Haydn, which is like one of the most amazing composers of jokes, unexpected twists, and Mozart and Stravinsky, the Rite of Spring. I mean, when don't we have that kind of like the element of surprise? So I would say the surprise in the contemporary music, it's everywhere, and that's also what makes it so fascinating. Because the other thing is that our brain, it's so wired, and we cannot kind of like change it, because our hardware, it's the same. We haven't changed our hardware. So the way we're wired is to make predictions, is to kind of like to find something that it's kind of, okay, this is it, now I understand this, and that makes me feel good. So since we cannot change that, the invitation is like, well, then enjoy it, and enjoy the ride, enjoy the crazy ride, and just try to let yourself go, and what is the composer wants you to feel.
You brought it, in that answer, you lead perfectly into the next two questions that I wanted to ask you about, because you referenced the Rite of Spring. On the heels of graduating from Yale School of Music, you not only commissioned a new work, but you also raised $10,000 for it to be performed. And I'm wondering what, which is a pretty ballsy thing to do, I have to say, right out of school. But what is it you're looking for in new music?
Well, I love that question, first of all, because it's been a while. It's been almost 10 years of that. That was because of the 100th anniversary of the Rite of Spring, and the Rite of Spring is one of the pieces that kind of like drove me crazy when I was a little kid, and it was kind of that score that always was there, in my bed table for years and years and years. So it kind of like became an obsession. But beyond the music, what makes a lot of sense to me with the Rite of Springs, and I think it's part of my answer to your question, is that that piece somehow it helps to understand how art it's a perpetual evolutionary thing. Because what happened 100 years ago, well, now more than 100 years ago, it's not only that Stravinsky kind of like, you know, broke everything that we knew, but actually it's the contrary. It's kind of like, this is something that it had to happen. Of course, that night, you know, that May night, everybody was so shocked because they were expecting something else. They were expecting like a regular kind of like a ballet classic, and with a Parisian audience that they were really, how to say, like old fashioned, you know, what they wanted. And of course, Stravinsky was kind of like, whoa, this is shaking this up. Stravinsky and Nijinsky, of course. But at the same time, when you look at it in perspective, and you see what was going on with art in general, like Cubism, or in science with Einstein, or Freud in psychology, and the pre-war and the post-19th century kind of like falling down everything. It's kind of how not the Rite of Spring would have happened. I mean, it was just impossible. So for me, my point of view of contemporary music is kind of like both ways. You look back to understand what happened, that we arrived to this point. So it's a permanent kind of like reflection to the point we are toward past and future. But at the same time, it's such a vivid experience on how relevant it's what we do in terms of this music. It's about creation. It's not only about performing, because every single piece, as the Rite of Spring, was this new piece. Some of them were a kind of like really subtle continuation. Other ones were breakthrough. But then the new thing, the new aspect of music and performing new music, it's been always there. So for me, it's essential to keep that spirit alive in everything we do as musicians, because if we only look back, then we are missing the point. And the point is, no, we are not only performing, we are pushing creation every day, because that's what it's all about. It's kind of like this alive organism with an unstoppable pulsation of creativity.
Well, and the advantage of the work that you're, you know, when you're doing contemporary work, is that you get a chance to possibly communicate with the composers and find out their intent.
Oh yeah.
Get a sense. That's got to make a radical difference for you.
That's amazing. Thank you for bringing that up, because yes, I forgot to mention that. Of course, I mean, for us performance to have the chance to work with the composer, it's like a dream, because then you understand the whole creation process. Because at the same time, the composers knows that even if they own the piece then it has to be performed. So at some point they have to let it go and it, you know, become the performance piece. But when you have the chance to be aligned in the same space for the rehearsals and for some hours, minutes, days, then you understand the whole process. Because even for composers, listening a rehearsal, it's such an important moment, a key moment, because they make corrections, because they change things, because they actually understand how it works. Because even the most experienced composer knows that the piece will behave differently when it actually exists. Even with the experience on your back, the papers is just a map. It's just like, you know, kind of like this is what I want. But when you get it, that's the real thing. And for us, who could be the most, you know, authorized voice than the composer? So if you can find a way to talk to him, to listen to him, and you know he is listening, or her is listening back there, what is going on, then you will have this much better. I mean, you know, not only in terms of performance, but in terms of experience, kind of like the ritual of doing this together.
So what you're describing is the conductor as cartographer.
I think it's always kind of like that at the beginning. I mean, we always try to respect the score the most we can. We try to be as precise as we can, but at the same time, it's so kind of like, I mean, how to say it, like you're an interpreter, right? A performance is an interpreter. You make your own interpretations of every single aspect of the score. I mean, there are just few things that you cannot change, like, which is, you know, meter, rhythm, and notes, like pitches. You can't deal with that. That's kind of like a definite aspect. But the rest of it, it's everything. It's kind of like, what do you think about that? What do you think about a forte? What is a forte? Nobody measured a forte, you know, in decibels. I mean, or you know, and even a metronome mark, which sounds to be or looks to be exact. Everybody knows that it's not, because the way the music behaves in a particular group, in a particular acoustic theater with the audience, will affect the shape, the counter, the phrasing. So all these kind of like fixed parameters, they're not fixed. We have to make our best, find our best, to try to be in the mind of the composer and kind of like extract that information. But the beautiful thing is that even if you have the composer here, here next to you, still there is room for, you know, something that it's not quite exact or definite. Even composers, somebody has many times says, you know, I think your way, I like it more now, or no, you know, I'll change this because I'm not quite convinced. It's such a beautiful experience, because it's the final, how to say, like, word to say that to say that music, it is a live organism.
The only place where you know where a forte is if you're doing pictures in an exhibition. But I digress. You know, as we discussed before we started recording this, you're in Barcelona, you're conducting the Magic Flute. What is the process by which you leave the world of a work composed over 230 years ago and enter the world multiple days, just a few days later, of these new works?
I think it's just because I feel it's the same. I know it's an easy answer, and it's kind of like almost cheap answer. I don't want to be cheap. I'm just saying that when you face music, you're facing like a phenomenon, you know, like putting together sounds, like shaping the tempo, the phrasing. You understanding colors, you're understanding balances, reacting to the energy of your players, reacting to your audience. So when you talk about those elements of music, and you make it kind of like an abstraction above the repertoire, you find yourself doing exactly the same thing. Of course, the difference will be style, will be, you know, well, the music, you know, the music in terms of like the score, but the way you face it, I always find it's pretty similar. Of course, you will adapt a lot of things, like things to ask, for instance. I mean, you know, to how to rehearse, or even how to conduct. Probably in contemporary music in general, not all of them, but you maybe need to be much more precise, because there's so element of rhythm that it kind of like molecules, like really small molecules, and you want to help, right? And in opera, it's your precision is different, because you are much more linked with the voice and the singers and the breath and obviously the style of your accompaniment. Yeah, but those are kind of like nuances of your changes, or on how you adapt to the repertoire you have in front of your eyes. But how you face music, I would say it's always the same.
Well, then, a work like the Magic Flute, every conductor I've ever spoken to says no matter how old the work is or how many times they've done it, there are always new discoveries to be made.
Absolutely.
So if there are new discoveries to be made in old works, what are the challenges with new works, apart from the fact that it's new?
Well, I think that's a big first step, because then it comes to find out what that first experience leaves you, right? Like you have to put it together, you have to understand the music, you have to help the performances, you have to bring obviously an energy and something that it's there in the music to keep the music alive and to engage and seduce your audience and to make happy the composer as well. So that is kind of like a big task. Then, of course, what happens, because the example of the Magic Flute, it's really true because we know the piece so well, because we have heard it millions of times, and because if you have luck enough, you have done it quite a bit. So that is why you start there to kind of like peeling the layers and going deeper and deeper and deeper and finding more and more and more details. But that comes with experience and revisiting, and that is, I think it's the most beautiful thing that I could say from our work, that it is true that no matter which piece you revisit, it will always be somehow new, and that's beautiful, because until the last day of our life, we will say, wow, I never thought this worked that way, or I never, heard that, or I never knew that this would work in the other direction. So from that point of view, I would summarize my answer to say, in contemporary music, the only thing that makes it different to the Magic Flute is that it will be the same when I perform the same piece for a second time, for a third time, for a fourth time. It wouldn't behave the other way.
Well, and hopefully, new works get more than one or two performances. That's the only way they will become as familiar as the Magic Flute.
That is for sure. And I think, yes, I agree with you. Absolutely, 100%. The only thing that I would add to that answer is that I think it's also something that it's part of music history evolution as well. I mean, when Magic Flute was premiered, it's not that it was the only piece that it was written. I mean, there are a lot of pieces that we just missed. So I think it's also part of kind of like survival procedure of any aspect of creation, that yes, while we live through a moment, we know much more about what is going on, that who or which are those that are going to survive decades. But again, I think that's been the case in every moment of history. It's just that when we look back, of course, we know those names, those pieces that survived the process.
Of course, now, with people becoming more aware of composers who have been slighted, particularly composers of color, it's like there is an opportunity to rediscover. So I guess
absolutely,
there is always going to be something that will appear, one hopes, that breaks through what previously might have seemed like an impossible barrier.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a fantastic time to revisit history in every turn, not only in music, in literature, in painting, in everything. And then we will have to wait and kind of like see how that process brings new classics into the repertoire, into the common knowledge.
Mark Swed wrote in the Los Angeles Times, I believe it was just within the last week, about how much new music is being performed in Los Angeles. How supportive are other parts of the world in performing new work?
Well, I think I'll start with saying that what the LA Phil is doing is just like unbelievable. It's really amazing, like how much they bring new music to the scene. That's for sure. And I think for everybody in the world, that's kind of like a lighthouse of inspiration. Because at the same time, to complete the answer, I think it's something that it matters. It matters to everybody. Everywhere somehow they are making efforts, but it's true that the LA Phil is kind of like, it's a big one, and as I said, like a huge inspiration in the direction we should try to go everywhere, because again, it's all about, or it's maybe not all about, but it's a lot about what I was trying to explain at the beginning, that for me, music is not only to revisit things, but actually to celebrate creation, because that's what it is. It's an act of creation. So performing new pieces, it's a way to feature that action, that force in artists, and not only to give them some moments of highlights or no. I think it should walk side by side, because otherwise it would be kind of like an attitude of a museum. And I deeply believe that performing art is not. It's more about like the experience, the here and now, the subjective memory, the encounter, complicity with the stage and off stage, and creation. It's all one big force of energy.
Like your concerts at San Francisco, where you're going to have a Kevin Putz piece in addition to well-established repertoire.
Exactly. I think it works so well that, there's always room to balance repertoire, I think. So I celebrate that they encourage that programming.
But do you see that kind of programming aggressively being done in other cities around the world?
Aggressively, it's a good word. Well, in Germany they do a lot. I would say also in Holland. I mean, in part of Europe, in Finland they do a lot as well. So I would say it's kind of like, it depends on where, right? It depends on how they are linked to contemporary art and contemporary music as well. In Latin America, surprisingly enough, actually, they do have a lot of kind of like festivals or kind of like in Chile, for instance, in my country, there are two main orchestras, and both are always trying to keep like new compositions in, maybe not in every program, but often. Even in youth orchestras, it's kind of like becoming something, but of course it's also something that you have to link with how you structure everything, not only your programming. It's also about like how you're programming, for instance, like competitions or commissions or even your budget for that, like it's how you think in the overall, and then you can kind of like put the ball rolling, because it's more than only performing a new piece. It's about promoting and infusing enthusiasm through artists and audience.
I have to say, everything you're saying dovetails so nicely into my questions. I'm wondering who slipped them to you. But I want to.
Nobody.
No, I know. I only wrote them this morning, so it's fine. But I want to start. I want to conclude where we started, which is with one of the last things you said in your TED Talk. You said that since your father, immediately on the heels of your father taking you to that concert at age 7, it changed your life so profoundly that you wanted to spend your life changing our expectations. What are the challenges of changing our lives with music we don't know versus changing our lives with music with which we are familiar?
I think the answer, it's more about how you experience the music more than the music itself. I deeply believe that our biggest challenge these days is to keep the flame on how essential and how irreplaceable is to attend to a performance, to go to this, as I said, like the bonfire rite, where you sit around and you contemplate something that's happening there, and you are surrounded by people that will experience it at the same time, and then it will fade, and then it will keep in your memory, in your heart, in your subconscious. But what I am saying this because when you embrace the importance of that, which makes us so human, so it's part of our core nature to share an experience, to be there with a group of people, then you realize that it's far more about that than what is actually performed. Because yes, of course, I wouldn't ever deny that probably it will be much more effective, or give it for granted in a good way, not like in a bad way to say that the end of like Mahler's Second will move you to the core, and you will cry and you will be absolutely overwhelmed, which is fair. I mean, Mahler is one of my favorite composers. I would ever, not say and push that into that direction. But at the same time, it's also true that if it's well delivered, if it's the right energy, if it's well performed, if there is passion and commitment on stage and the performance and everything, you could also be incredibly moved by a piece that you've never heard before, even if it's because you were shocked, you were provoked, or you were, as I said before, seduced by the sounds or the storytelling or the shape. So I just say and encourage to people to go with an open heart, open mind, but go and experience the experience, because there is a high chance that the experience itself will change your life.
Terrific. I really appreciate your time. I know the Queen of the Night is calling you shortly.
Probably.
So have a great performance tonight. Are you all right with my posting our interview on the YouTube channel that we have for Cultural Attaché?
Yes, of course, of course.
Terrific. Then this will
thank you so much.
This will be up early next week, and I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to make the concert, but I will hopefully be around for the Saisons concert at the Bowl later this summer.
Oh, nice, great. That's going to be also really fun. I love the vibe of the Hollywood Bowl, and every time I've conducted there, it's just a blast of fun and energy. I love it.
Well, good. Well, travel safe, and we will see you in the States soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.